the first thing I'll tell you is get into it right now because things are going to get heated up pretty soon. And then, the really good people, the people who are already getting jobs in investment, banks and all of that, they're going to come looking for these jobs.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Takeaway Club, where I talk to interesting people across different walks of life to get to know their stories and, more importantly, how they got to where they are, including their motivations, habits, routines, and aspirations, some of which we can apply to our own lives. In today's episode, I have a very special guest. He's one of the best storytellers in the Indian SaaS ecosystem and one of my personal favorite marketeers, someone I look up to all the time. Sairam Krishnan, ladies and gentlemen. Sairam kicked off his career nearly a decade ago at Freshworks, joining as only the second person on the marketing team, working very close with Girish himself. Since then, he has had wildly successful stints with Wingify, iMocha, and is currently a marketer in residence at Axel India. He is also the author of two kick-ass Substack publications, the CMO Journal, where he writes about marketing growth and strategy, and the East Coast Road, where he talks about his personal experiences, travel, and his love for chai. Without further ado, here is an insightful conversation with timeless wisdom on writing, marketing, and scaling startup teams with Saram Krishnan. So I thought a good place to start would be who is Sairam Krishnan and what is your story and how did you get to where you are?
Okay. I mean, that's a tough question to answer, but I'll try to go for it. So, I mean, I was born in Pondicherry, but I grew up all around the country um, because my father was in the Air Force. And one of the things I found early when I was, I think, 13, 14 was a love for advertisements. And I think I knew then that, I could be thinking about marketing at some stage, though I didn't know at that time it was called marketing or anything of that sort. It was something that I had in my head, though I couldn't articulate it. Like obviously not. But I think generally when I then we moved to Pondicherry, and I grew up here in the south. And one of the things that I happened at that time was that everybody was taking up engineering around early 2000s. I joined engineering also in 2005, which was easily one of the worst decisions of my life. But anyway, like I did my engineering. I wouldn't have got through it without a lot of like shenanigans. But somehow I finished the degree. But when I finished, it was 2009, and it was the middle of the recession. Like I mean, the beginning of the global recession, and there were no jobs. Right until that time, the Indian IT services industry was like snapping all of us up, and I really wasn't good enough to be getting a job anyway, right? So I mean, I really did not know coding. I had no idea of what these companies did. I was like um, I mean, how do I put it? I was like as much of a 17, 18-year-old as you think could be. I had no idea how the world worked or anything of that sort. But one thing I knew was that, hey, this is not going to happen in the sense I have to do something. I cannot sit idle for a year. So I had written the CAT, and I got through my MBA, and I went to Amrita in Coimbatore. I finished my MBA there in 2011. I think two were like really important years in my life. I spent a lot of time thinking and reading and learning marketing, and we had a great set of teachers and all of that, and it changed my life around. Like until then, I had no idea what I was doing. It was all very random, and then life changed. It became about, okay, I know this, I'm good at this. Let's see what happens if I do this. And I had a little bit of a direction, and so compared to what I was before, that little bit of direction was a lot of direction. And then I think that was when my marketing journey started. I got a job through campus. I went to Hyderabad. It was actually at the retail company Heritage. But then about 2 to 3 months later, I knew that this was not working. And that's when a company called Fresh Desk at that time, a very small startup, had put up advertisement on LinkedIn saying that they were looking for content people. I could write, so I applied, And yeah, there started my SaaS journey, I guess.
Right. And the rest, as they say, is history.
I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I was part of history. I think that's what I would say. I was part of a lot of history. Like, um, I was the earliest non-Zoho, person in the early Freshworks team. I was the I was the only younger than 24 person at that time in the team, and it meant that the amount of learning that I was having was phenomenal, which meant that I was actually the luckier one, right? I was just learning. I was at a place where great things were happening, and I just lapped it all up, and it went from there.
That must have been fascinating. Being at fresh desk at that early, it's really hard to wrap our heads around at this point of time, right? Given how fast the company has scaled and the kind of impact that they have had, so that must have been one hell of an experience. And I want to get into more detail around that, but just taking a step back, so we are talking what a good 7-8 years ago, and you were doing your MBA. So there, the most logical option would have been, picking something like an FMCG, or like you mentioned, the heritage job, right? So what were there like a particular incident, or was there someone who gave you that push, saying, hey, there is a startup here, you need to apply, right? Because obviously it would have been a huge gamble at that point for you, right?
No, I didn't think of it that way, da. So what we were so at Heritage, I was simply not learning anything, nor was I interested in what was going on, right? I think it was partly a function of what these companies expect young management graduates to do, right? And they don't give you the resources and the power to actually do anything, right? So I had tried to do a couple of things. I had tried to move around a couple of things around, but then I realized it was futile, and then I just I lost interest. And at that point, I guess, I used to write, right, in college and all of that, and I realized that there is this function or a skill that can be used, and I applied to Freshdesk. Once I saw that, I was applying, to a lot of places actually, but none of them were. I had actually talked to like another Zoho mafia company at that same time, and I mean, I had one interview and I didn't go back there again. So I had enough of a idea to see um, what kind of places I didn't want to go to. So that was my like abiding agenda. But when I talked to Girish, I think I knew from the beginning that this is something special. The idea was what kind of special. That was the question I was asking myself. What kind of special is this going to be, and is this a gamble I'm okay to take? Now I had nothing to lose, so I had no career, I had no name, I had nothing, so it wasn't really a risk. Yeah, like I mean, for what I say, it was a risk for Girish to take me.
turned out turned out a pretty good ROI for him.
Yeah, I don't know what freshness, but for me it turned out to be great.
Right. That's amazing. No, actually, that's exactly what we were talking about, right? Before we hit on the record as well. So how the SaaS ecosystem has kind of just taken us all in, right? All these people who have these skills that were much difficult to quantify earlier, right? So earlier, you had to know how to write code. Then that was the job market for you, or you should have been good with numbers. Then you went into something like accounting, right? So people who wrote, if it weren't for the ecosystem evolving the way it has now, I think a lot of us would have ended up in different jobs, less happier jobs, and then maintaining our own personal blogs, ranting on Twitter and stuff like that.
No, I definitely think so. I think SaaS has turned that around for us. But here's the thing: SaaS is a slightly more advanced version of the IT services boom that we had, in the sense that you need to have a particular skill to be valuable, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s, you could get into a services place if you're fairly smart and you had a marginal skill, and then they trained you, right? One of the things that we don't have in SaaS is that training is not available, right? There's no time. Like we are building products for the world, and there's no time for any companies to invest in that kind of training that the TCSs and the CTSs of the world were doing back then. And so, which means that you have to walk in with a particular skill, walk in with something that you can immediately provide to the organization that you're working at, and which means that a lot of people are getting left behind also, right? One of the conversations that I had with a very senior fresh desk person, another very very senior Zoho person, and who came to Fresh Works and is now leading customer support globally. Kalyan is his name, and I was talking to him once outside the office in a very random conversation. But one of the things that we agreed upon, and he's a senior, so I tend to, like, I mean, 20 years in SaaS and in the ecosystem. So I tend to like rate his comments also highly, in the sense that we are also lucky, and we shouldn't let that part go, right? If Girish had not given me that job, I would have no idea what I'd be doing right now. I'd be probably doing something ridiculous, right? And if SaaS had not existed at that, at that stage, at this stage, even a lot of us would still be struggling. Like, the economy is quite down. There's not a lot to do apart from the companies that we now have, which are selling to the world from here. So if SaaS had not existed, it would be quite a different world.
Absolutely. And we have brought up Girish's name like 5-6 times already. And that's something that I really want to, understand in an elaborate fashion, if that's okay with you. So he's kind of like the Rajnikant of our Indian SaaS ecosystem, if he'd be okay with me saying that. And you have been all praise about him, right? So I think I read somewhere that you even mentioned I went to 2 universities, one Amrita for MBA and Girish School of Marketing, right? So what was that experience like, getting in that early, working with them on a daily basis, and what were some of the lessons you learned? Just how was your week like?
Okay. So I there's not a lot to the week. It was just that I did what I was told, right? And even then, not very well. When I was early in my Freshworks career, I really wasn't that good, right? I had a skill, and that made me valuable enough to keep around, right? And I was smart enough to pick things up, right? But mostly I did what I was told, right? And that was and the ability to actually get to 70-80% of what I was told to do was actually good enough at that time, right? If I had the attitude and the skills I had when I joined Freshdesk now, I don't know if I would find the kind of roles that much smarter people at this stage are finding. I would be far back in the pecking order. The thing is, working with Girish at that time was because the company was very young. You had like the personal contact with your boss, with your mentors, and with whatever was going on. I was mostly a sponge. I was just soaking stuff up. But here's the thing: I did not know the importance of what I was learning until a very long time after, right? There are certain things that now that I remember make a lot more sense to me now than it did at that time, right? So about Girish himself, see, um, he is a special person, right? Firstly, the fact that there are a lot of, I don't want to go a lot into like what kind of a product person he is, what kind of a his abilities as as an administrator, as a founder, as a CEO. I mean, there's enough written and enough talked about it by better people. I am not. I don't think that that's something that I need to talk about. Um, what I saw and what I remember, and I always will, about Girish is that his ability to, not his ability, but his down to earth nature, right? He cared, like he genuinely cared for like the smallest person in the team. I was 22, 23 at the time. He would like sit with me. Like I remember once behind a car, we were talking about something else. He pulled out his laptop, explained to me something that I was not able to understand on the way home, right? That kind of mentorship, which was genuine, right? And even if I was not working for him, right, he would have done that. So that's just the kind of person he is. And so, I mean, there's a lot said, as I said, about there's a lot told and written about his qualities otherwise as the founder and CEO of Freshworks. I just think of him as the one of the best people I've met. And for me, that comes more that is more valuable and more important than anything. He actually cares about the stuff that he writes and talks and does, and that's so incredibly rare.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's so true. Actually, I mean my story is pretty similar as well. So the very first job I had, my CEO was like that. The mentor figure who'd always go out of his way to help out. Right. It doesn't matter if it's work or otherwise. Just being there all the time. Right. So early in your career, that that's like probably the most important thing, right? More than the compensation or the kind of role you do, because
Oh yeah, easily, very
it,
easily.
they equip you with the right skills, and more importantly the right mindset for you to actually make better decisions. Like you say, after coming out of Freshworks, you would have probably realized how much you had learned in there. When at your next job you got to kind of use all of those experiences to do your work at Wingify, I guess. Right. So yeah,
Oh, definitely. And I mean, it's not about just that. It's I would actually text him even during my during other roles. I would say, Girish, I have this problem, this marketing problem. He would tell me. I could not reply immediately because he was busy, but he would tell me even after.
So, actually, I have a very interesting. I know you worked on a lot of interesting campaigns during your time at Freshworks. So, I'm just
Mhm.
gonna do this. I'm just gonna play you a very small audio, right? And then we'll talk about it, if if that works for you.
Sure, sure.
I'm sure you would have a lot of interesting things to say around this, right?
Ago, in a network far, far away, the business world was being taken over by the federation known as Premise On. The Premise On Federation was an evil council, burdening innocent people with heavy software and cumbersome installations.
So I think this is the SaaS Wars campaign.
100%.
Led by our CMO David Thompson. He's not with Freshworks anymore, but I mean it was a great campaign. I didn't work on this actually. This wasn't my campaign.
But you were part of the Salesforce, right?
I was that campaign. Yes, I was part of.
I
And that
mean,
was also led
probably.
by our CMO, and that was also led by David Thompson and my former boss Arvind Parthiban. He's now started his second company called SuperOps.
Yeah. So, what was, I mean, this? How do you even approach something like this, right? So when you are working at something like a Salesforce campaign, which is so contrarian, right, in so many ways, it's like almost giving a taste of Salesforce own medicine to them, right in their backyard. So how was the feeling in the air in the course of putting together this campaign?
Right. I mean, even then, right, you don't realize the audacity of what you're doing because you're so involved in the details. And I was very involved in the details. Because there's a lot to be done. Like there's a landing page to be put up and everybody needs to agree on it, and there's like blogs to be done and everybody needs to be okay with it. And we need to like do PR, and everybody needs to like talk to get people on board in it. There needs to be social. So there's a lot of parts of a campaign, right? And I was actually the executioner. I wasn't really part of the ideation part. Um, I mean, cannot say not really part of it, but I wasn't like the core of the ideation part. That Arvind and the rest of the creative team took care of. But when it came to me, then when the details come, you can then take a little bit of like leeway with the way that you want the story to be told, right? So that's where I came in. I executed the part of the social, the ground stuff. I was part of all of that, so it was great fun. So the thing is that, see, with a company like Freshworks and this is something that I've written about repeatedly. Indian SaaS companies, we are at a level where we have the quality to go after any company in the world, but somehow we are a little bit timid in doing that, right? One of the things that I loved the campaign was for exactly that, right? We actually broke the rules in a certain way, like Zoho has been there for a long time, right? Kayako was there for a long time. There were quite a few other companies that were there, that were around, like even before Freshworks, right? Wingify was started around the same time that Freshworks was, right? But this was the first truly global campaign, right? When I say global, I mean there were probably other like digital campaigns, other stuff that would have been done, but the biggest ATL campaign that I think that we did from India would probably have been this. And the audacity of it was just this, right? If we do the same things again, like the same digital, the same stuff over and over again, we cannot expect any different results, right? And that's why David had come into the company as well. We had brought in somebody from the Valley, right? And so when that happened, it was very clear that we are going to do something spectacular. And sometimes the spectacular part of the marketing is the marketing itself, right? I mean, what Salesforce did is something else. It can be measured differently, but what Salesforce is also important. Like it is an attempt first and foremost to break free of stuff that we're already doing, and that in itself was a symbol, almost was a message almost.
Coming into your subsequent roles, moving away from Freshworks a little bit, then you moved on to Wingify. Between Girish and Paras, what were the different things that you learned from them? Of course, we touched upon the stuff you learned from Girish, and how was it different from someone like Paras Chopra, who has a different personality, right? So he's, for instance, whatever Girish does, right? All the spectacular, all these campaigns or all kinds of stunts that Freshworks has successfully pulled off over the years. It's even then it's kind of in a private way, right? So Girish doesn't talk much on Twitter, right? Or he's very comfortable with his group, if I can put it that way. I think I'd probably I'll have you to correct if I'm that wrong, but someone like Paras, who is really active on Twitter, who kind of openly builds, right? So that's two different styles of management. So what is the biggest learning here, and how was it different coming off from a fresher's job at Freshworks?
Okay, that's an interesting question, but I don't think, see, the thing is that the idea, I don't think that a comparison exists, right? These are extremely different companies with extremely different, viewpoints on company building, and I don't think extremely different CEOs. They actually are quite similar in a lot of ways. But what the major difference is between these two companies is actually, how do I put it? Is actually the viewpoint of the way of looking at the world, right? Wingify was a very different company from the time I joined. Even like all companies evolve, right? So there is no real wave or a differentiation we can make. Freshworks could have gone in any other time the Wingify way, and Wingify could have gone at any other time the Freshworks way, right? Raising and like growing, and Wingify becoming like this, like really, really extraordinary stable business, and this, I don't think there is a differentiation. What I can say about working with both of them is that there is Girish is a marketer, and people don't realize this, right? But he's a product person, of course, but Girish's mind is a marketer's mind. So when you have an idea, when you have like a campaign or something, it's very easy for you to get buy-in from a founder, right? Who understands and knows marketing, understands the value of something that may or may not be successful, right? Paras, on the other hand, is an engineer, a builder, right? He's a maker of products. He's a maker of stuff, right? And he is going to think about it in a very analytical, very different way. That is his strength, right? And so therefore, what happens is you have completely two different viewpoints on product and company building, and that I think defines the difference. With Girish, I learned marketing. With Paras, I learned business, and this is what I usually tell people when they ask me about this.
Right. I'm very glad that you brought up this analytical part versus Girish's storytelling perspective to things, right? This is where I'm curious about how you approach marketing, right? As a really good writer, you might always have that a little bit of leaning towards the right brain side of things, right? The more creative aspects, the flair and the imagination and the instinct that comes with writers in general, right? But as you evolve from your role from being just this content person to actually becoming a more nuanced marketer, right? It means at that point you have to get comfortable with reading through the data. Was there ever a difficulty for you personally, or were you always good at both aspects of it? And if there were, how did you approach it, or how should anyone approach this part where someone evolves from a really good writer to becoming a marketer?
That's a good question, and it's very pertinent in the sense that it is very important as you grow to evolve in your career, to figure out what you need to get, what you need to learn more, and what you need to get better at, and all of that. But I don't think you should lean too far from what you're extremely good at. If you do that, you will go into places which may not be comfortable to you, or may not be where you may not be Sachin, right? And I'd rather, you know, Sachin played cricket and not golf, right? So this is incredibly important even for us as marketers. We tend to, what happens is, as we grow, we start to think that we need to do, as head of marketing, we need to start thinking about this and that also and all of it. But here, like right now, you have so many tools, you have so many things to get the data right? So it's not necessary that you have to get better at everything, right? You definitely need to get the ability to look at the numbers, figure out what's going on, get data oriented and all of that. That's no brainer, that's a given, right? But we shouldn't move away from what you are already good at, right? Because that's where you're adding the most value, right? For example, at Wingify, we did a lot of great storytelling around marketing to get that done, to get to the growth that we were getting, right? But if I had said that no, I will stop doing this, but then focus on this 50% of the time, it probably would not have worked. Like, it worked because we concentrated 90% of the time on what we're good at, became really good at that, and then moved on, right? So this is something that I definitely would encourage people to think about. Get really good at what you're already good at. After you're in that position, it becomes much easier to pave over those other gaps that you have in your knowledge in your knowledge repository. So this is a great example. I definitely struggled. Yeah, I don't think there are two ways about it. In Freshdesk, I didn't have to worry about that because I was a writer. Like, I was a content person, then I was in product marketing teams, and it wasn't necessarily number oriented, and I was playing to my strengths, right? Even then, you won some, you lost some, but you were playing to your strengths. At Wingify, I was leading a products marketing, and that's when the entire conversation had to change. It had to shift towards the way I was putting out stuff, data. I had to figure out what was working, what was not, and so on. I don't think I succeeded completely in bridging that gap. I don't think I still have, but I have realized that that's not what your job is, right? As a marketer, as somebody who's trying to build something and grow something, your job is to not to go and learn stuff there. Your job is to get the job done, right? And if you leaning on what you're good at is getting the job done faster, or you can go into places where they want this particular part of your ability, then you're going to succeed anyway. So I'd rather do that than go and try to like bridge a gap in my knowledge that I very well may be able to bridge very well later, but I might probably fail at as well.
That's a brilliant insight. So I had a very interesting conversation with someone who wanted to get into our team, right? If you remember, I think a few days back I had even put out this tweet. How do you go about hiring new without any writing experience and stuff like that? One of the interesting candidates that we had was who had this bit of marketing flair, and who was very raw, right? Straight out of college, little bit of marketing flair, but we really wanted to get them on board. But the problem was they were this generalist types, right? So we couldn't really figure out what was the one thing that they could really move the needle, right? So I kind of gave that. I mean, after the interviews were over, I had a personal chat. I mean, from the couple of years of experience I had, so I put out. We are currently on the lookout for a bowler like Cummins or a batter like Warner. But what we have in you is someone like a Stoinis or a Henriquez, right? So that all-rounder, once you kind of have them on board and you see what they bring to the table, it becomes impossible to drop them out, right? So to stretch the cricket analogy further, someone like Ben Stokes. But to get there, I could actually see that how difficult it was from their end as well, and how difficult it was for companies as well, because we wanted them here, but we couldn't really figure that out, right? So I think this is something that I had been right from that conversation, I had been meaning to get your insights on this, right? So from a company perspective, how do you approach people who are these generalists, and for someone starting anew, right, who really don't have that exact skill set or haven't figured that out, how should they approach their first job?
Okay, so if you're young and you are like looking at like an opening into SaaS and coming into the thing, first the idea is that the first thing I'll tell you is get into it right now, because things are going to get heated up pretty soon, and then the entire world is going to the really good people, the people who are already getting jobs in investment banks and all of that, they're going to come looking for these jobs. So right now is the best time to get into SaaS, because it's still a market where you can get the job that you want. And the best way to get that opening job is either support or content, right? And support is a great place to start. I always say that. I wish I had started it, because I would have had a little bit more of a product, knowledge maybe, if I had like started in support. What do you need in support? A good grasp of like the product itself or the underlying technology itself, which it's not very difficult to learn, and communication skills. I mean, you should be good, right? And an entry level support role can be pretty okay to get, and once you do that, you can grow up the ladder that way. And then there's another, which is the writing skills are easily the most underrated skills you can build in college, and you can build in like post graduation. If you want to get into marketing in SaaS, the easiest entry point is content, and you should get in via that. Because trying to get into product, trying to get into like brand, all of that is difficult to do. You can grow into those roles, right? But getting into content is pretty easy to demonstrate that you can give, that you can provide. How do I put it? You can start giving immediately into the job, and if you're able to like show that, the job itself will be easier for you to get. And once you get in, you can figure out which direction you want to go in your career. One of the problems I've had when like interviewing people is that they have some kind of like pretty clear idea that I want to get into product, and if not, I won't get into anything else. I'll just wait for it. If I don't get like a senior kind of sales thing, then probably not. But I don't think that's a good approach, right? The idea is to get into the best companies that you think are doing good work, and find a way to get into the system. You can grow from there.
Right. I want to come back to what you mentioned about writing here, but just one more around marketing that we had discussed a few minutes ago, right? So being a natural storyteller, someone like you, uh, and also starting from writing to get looking at things in a holistic way. Um, do you feel are there any signs that the art of storytelling might have a lesser impact going forward, with more and more data coming in, and everything becoming more and more predictable, right? If you do ABC right, you're gonna hit XYZ, right? So do you think, say something like all these extravagant campaigns or these really out of the box ideas, do they really still have, obviously they'll still be there, but do you think their impact on the overall marketing efforts become lesser, or is it actually the other way around?
Firstly, I don't think anything is getting predictable. I mean, one of the first things you realize when you grow into teams is that marketing is anything but predictable, right? And I have struggled with data on so many teams with and so many and so many companies now that not so many, but a few companies now, to know that it's one of the things that we talk about immediately. Look at this data, look at this data. And I always ask this question, right? Okay, so the data says this. What is our action item out of this, right? Um, most times, and I'm not even kidding, more than 75% of the time, people have no idea what to do with the data, right? And we still have that. I mean, a lot of the data which works is that, hey, this page is working. Look at the analytics. This page is not working. Look at the conversions and all of that. All of that data is great, right? All of that data is what in marketing revolves around, right? But you are talking about growth. You're talking about are we going to take this product company not from 1 to 5 billion, not from 1 to 5 million, right? But taking that from 5 to above, right? And that takes a very different strategy than just putting 1, 2, and 3 steps together and moving ahead. Even I've worked with quite a few startups in the last year, and getting from 0 to 1 is an incredibly difficult job, right? And if you go and tell all of these companies that I mean, it's getting pretty predictable, I mean, they would be really angry with you, because if it was predictable, we would have a lot of SaaS companies from India. We don't, yeah. And the reason is that it is not predictable. Marketing is probably the toughest part right now, right? Of building a SaaS business, and there's no two ways about it. And storytelling is, I wouldn't say storytelling, right? And people use that word as if it's some kind of magic mantra. I don't think it's necessarily that. I'll tell you what I think it is. I think there are two ways to look at how you're going to take your company big. You can do the things that everybody else did in the 2010s, right? And will you get someplace? Yeah, absolutely. You'll get to someplace if your product is good and you're fighting in a known category, and you have a better product in some ways, and you can get to a certain position, absolutely. But if you're going to grow beyond a certain level, you need a marketing strategy that's much bigger than this. You need to see if you can position yourself better. You need to see if you can pick a fight with somebody, position yourself as better than that or better than this, and say that the world is going to be a better place because of us, and so on and so forth. Only then will you get the traction, right, necessary to go to the larger fight, going from beyond 0 to 1, and then beyond that fighting against the biggest in the world. For that, you can't just do it with the same kind of digital marketing that you're doing. I mean, it's pretty clear, everybody's tried it already. It's not going to work. You need to go out with a larger holistic marketing strategy, part of which is storytelling. It's not necessarily storytelling you lead with it. No, it's not a panacea for all your evils. It's a larger strategy, of one part of which is storytelling.
Coming back to your writing, how do you measure your progress as a writer, right? Is there any way to quantify it? For example, how has Sairam as a writer evolved from, say, 2011 to 15 to 20?
I don't. I don't really measure that. I don't think that that's something that I want to measure. I mean, see, I am not of the idea of almost measuring anything. Yeah, like, you cannot measure something that you cannot measure life. You cannot measure the good things. You cannot measure a lot of things in life. And so um, this sort of comes under that. Like I always used to write, like 2009 or 10. I realized that okay, I was just about finishing engineering and getting into business school. That is when I realized that okay, I write and I enjoy it, and people are reading it and saying that I'm good, so it must be good and all of that. What, it's been 10 years now, right? So um, I don't think I've changed dramatically. It's just that I have read more. I have rounded myself out as a person, and therefore my writing shifts. Right? See, writing is not something that is impersonal, right? So it's not, for example, bowling, right? You can run in, like 20 overs a day, finish it off, and then come back. It's not that, right? Writing is part of part of your thought process, right? It's how you think is how you write,
Right.
and which means that I think the evolution of my writing is not something I think about at all. Like it's not. I tend to think about how I've changed, and therefore my writing shifts. Um, you know, uh, I can't find the word for it, but I don't think it's evolution. My writing has, uh, I mean, the better word for it is evolved, but let's stick with that. So, my writing has evolved in with who I have become, I guess, and that's about the best explanation I've come up with. I don't train for it. I don't like think about it too much. But however, what the only thing that I do is I try to write a lot more. I still am not happy with how much I write, and so that's about the only thing that I do. I just try to keep writing a lot more.
How does someone who hasn't been reading in their early years, right? Because I feel that's where a lot of the good stuff, all the writing that comes from these great writers, I feel that it forms at a really young age, right? From the exposure to the books and novels and such, right? So how does someone who hasn't done that kind of make up for it at this point of time?
People have this question a lot, in the sense that how do you get better at writing itself, or uh, how do you get interested in it to like write so much, right? I think the answer is pretty simple. Write what you are interested in. I started out writing about cricket in 2009, 2010. I had a blog which I deleted later, but I mean, it was very early. I remember this was JP Dumini's first test and something like that, and he had played as blinder, and I wrote about that and all of that. So started writing because I realized that I am so passionate about this thing that I need an outlet, and because my point of like connection with the world was books and words, I wrote about that. For somebody else today, that might be a video, because they might be looking at, they might have grown up watching Friends, and so they want to like make a funny thing about it. So a late millennial, right, is probably their sort of their normal haunt is YouTube, right? So they might be thinking about a YouTube show almost immediately, right? So I don't think it's necessarily writing, right? It's just that how you communicate is a part of how you have been communicated to, right? And I grew up in the I was 3 in 1990. I was 2.5 in 1990. So between 1990 and 2004, 2005, by the time the internet came and everything happened, I had nothing else to do. So I read books. So that was my window to the world. So whatever is your window to the world, I think you'll get there. It's just that if you want to write now, which is your question, right? I think you should go and read. See, without reading, you cannot be a good writer. That's pretty clear. The idea is go and read something that you're already interested in. Like, for example, if Krishna, you want to be and you are interested in cricket, there's a new Guha book out. Ramchandra Guha book out on cricket, right? So you read that, like read something else, read Mike Brearley's book on captaincy. So now you have like a set of things that you're interested in, which you will read, right? Rahul Bhattacharya's book, Pandits on Pakistan. All of that, if you read, like you'll get to, you'll easily read that because you're interested in it. And suddenly you would have, read 40, 50 books a year. You would have read 150, 200 books in 4 years. And then you realize that you are a much better writer because now it subconsciously comes out in the way you write.
That's very true. I mean, I've been fortunate to actually pick up reading over the last year or so. I might have gone through like a good 40, 50 books right over the year and a half. And this is probably the most transformation that I have had in a single year. Right? There is, like you say, there is nothing magical to it, but just that when you do it day in and day out, you can actually see that perspective to things evolving. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it also means that it also doesn't necessarily have to be books, right? For example, if you are a founder, right, and you simply don't have time, right? So you can sit and read all the blogs and stuff that go through in the entire first round review, repository, and that will be enough. Like that's also reading, right? I mean, there's no need to be snobbish about it and only read books. If we are tech people, we can read tech stuff.
Right. Cool. So that kind of ends our first of the three phases to the conversation. I think in the last 2 days, I mentioned a couple of really good friends and people in my network that I'm having you on the podcast, and they were really interested in getting your thoughts on some of the things, which I have as like 3-4 questions here. So we could get to that.
Go for it.
Nice. So the first one, right? I'll just jump right into the question. There's no name or anything background to it. So what are some of the lesser known SaaS companies in India who are really killing it with marketing or storytelling? Ignore the Chargebees and Wingifys, etc. Someone who hasn't really, been in the mainstream picture.
Right. That's a really good question. There's a company called Emitter. There's a company called Verloop. Siddharth is there. He's head of marketing. Like they are doing a really good job. I mean, out of the top of my mind, I mean, I think Haptic is doing a pretty good job. I don't know if they're SaaS, but Haptic is doing a pretty good job these days. Atlan, I love their branding and what they are doing. They're pretty good, marketing org. There's a few others, yeah. But here's the thing: like the fact that you are actually having to think about who they are means that they have not really done the jobs that they can do, right? And I think that's sort of the takeaway from this question, in that we should have a lot more of these.
Yeah, that's probably true. I'll probably after the conversation, when you have had more time to think about this, I think this is one of those things. The longer you think, you'll probably have more answers, right? So we can later add them to the show notes or something, so people can actually go and check out these brands.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure I'm missing out on like 2 or 3 like really good ones that I look up to, but I mean nothing on the top of my head.
Okay, so someone with 3 to 4 years of experience, but not in SaaS, engineering and then consultancy, who's product marketing for and not, right? So is that too open-ended for you to make sense?
Yeah, I think so. See, here's the thing: like, does this person want to get into product marketing? Are they good enough for product marketing? Yes, they are, but they'll have to probably figure out a way to get in, and that best way to do that is support, right? I mean, if they're a consultant and they know what the communication is pretty great. Ask for a support role, get into that support role. 6 months later, you'll be in a position to pitch for a product management or a product marketing role yourself.
Right. But it's it's a complex equation, right? Moving from consultancy to support,
I
and
don't think so. I don't think so. So here's the thing. I think we complicate it. We don't think. See, um, you want to get into SaaS and you want to get into product management. That's one, right? Where you are coming from doesn't matter,
Mm,
right? If unless you've spent 10 years in one place,
mm,
right, and have a very good repository of like organizational and sectoral knowledge that you are now giving up to move to SaaS, I would discourage that. But if you're only like 3 to 4 years and you've learned quite a few things, but know that you want to shift now, that's a good time to shift.
right. I mean, just to kind of follow up with that, would you add other factors like comp or whether it's enterprise or SMB? No, I think that's probably where the equation gets complicated, right?
No,
So,
that's where it gets complicated. But again, see, SaaS is a growing space in India,
mm,
right? If you're going to get into this, there's going to be a lot more SaaS companies in the future. So
right.
even if you make a bad call, right, end up in a place that's not very good, you're not learning a lot, but you've still got into SaaS, right? I mean, you can figure out what you want to do with it later. But if you're in a very well-paying consultant role, very good thing already going, and you have grown in that a fair way, and then you want to shift, I don't know. I think you'll have to think about that a little bit, a little more.
Right. So the next one is in an era where everything is going digital, and what do you think the brands need to do to stand out, especially in B2B SaaS?
Firstly, if you're making an also ran product, right, then you're going to have a problem anyway. If that, I mean, you shouldn't the marketing, the better marketing. How do I put this? Better marketing comes from a better product, right? And so if you're going to differentiate yourself, that has to come from the product itself, right? You can't start off with saying that here's me, I'm like these five other products. How do I differentiate myself? You can't, because you're like these five other products, right? So firstly, the product has to be differentiated. And if you're building something that's an also ran, don't do it, because it's going to get very, very difficult. However, if you can do it in a better way, if there is a viewpoint on how you're going to be better than these other five, on how
Right.
the user is going to be better served by you than these other five, right? And you have a viewpoint and you have a story and you have a very clear thing, then you go and take a loudspeaker and shout this particular thing from the top of your at the top of your voice, and you will probably find a way to stand apart.
Right. So the product comes first, always.
No, the product definitely comes first. If you're like, if any founder or any marketing team is looking at the product and then thinking about marketing, then by definition, you're already on the back foot.
Right. So here the next one. I think something that we touched on. So earlier in the conversation, where do you see B2B marketing, SaaS marketing heading towards? We have data heavy functions and we have storytelling functions. Do you see a divergence in the functions moving forward, or a tighter alignment?
I see both, Krishna. It's a good question, and it's a very sharp question, because this person probably knows what's going on. So there is a divergence and there's also a convergence. And the divergence is happening in organizations in which the divergence is all right. And for example, a multi-product company in which there's a huge, there's 200, 250 marketing people, right? So you need to have an organizational structure which allows you to do this well, which allows you to do brand well and also digital marketing and digital stuff well, right? Which means that there probably will be a divergence. But if you're a small one product company, right, and you need to tie it all together and actually be a challenger, right, there'll be a convergence, because you need all of them to work together.
So the last one from the audience's picks. How is fresher marketing recruitment going to change or evolve moving forward, with SaaS maturing at lightning speed, and but the future of workforce having no idea about SaaS? What do we need to do to bridge those gaps? This is again a brilliant question, I guess.
Okay, this is a good question, but here's the thing. freshers need to really pull their socks up. Like this is something that I would not have told my juniors. Like when I went, I used to go back to my university like a couple of times, and I always used to tell them, chill, like you will figure it out, right? But after the pandemic and after right now our economy is not in a great place either, right? Like with or without the pandemic, we were in a bad place any which way. So and now with the pandemic, it's even worse. Jobs are very hard to come by. Good jobs are, horribly difficult to come by, which means that you need to be at the top of your game and you need to be clear what you want. And it's not something that I am happy with, because I definitely think, people coming out of college should be able, I mean, there should be a little bit more space for them to play and like figure out what they want to do. But the difficult truth is that there's not, right? However, what they need to do is figure out, okay, which industry they're going towards. For example, if someone is going to try to go to retail, if someone wants to go to, lighting, if someone wants to go work in banking, they probably need to build for themselves a portfolio um, or a project or something of some sort that they've already done, that they can immediately go and show in interviews, right? And say that, hey, here's something I've already done, right? I'll give you an example. And from the SaaS space, if somebody wants to work in content, right? You don't go apply in the job and then sit quietly. You you go through the company's blog, write write 5 new ones, try to see if you can really like polish that up, take a printout, send it to the hiring manager, send it to the hiring, send it to the person who is hiring and all of that, and then see if they can hire you. Because otherwise, you're just one among the tribe, and if that one among the rest, right? And if that is going to happen, yeah, I mean, there's very less chance that you will be hired. Which means that every single job that you're applying to, you have to apply like the world depends on it, and you have to like work for it. You just cannot send your CV and wait for it.
Right.
So, freshers are going to graduate in a bad place. I mean, we shouldn't mince words about that, so that they understand where they are getting into. But if they are able to do that hard work and show the world what they are capable of, there's still a lot of opportunities to be had.
Right. So perhaps a follow-up to that is, do you think the SaaS community should kind of take that mantle of, exposing these people to how the ecosystem works, right? I think, Karthik Pasupati from Zoho, I think he had a really good initiative, right? I think it was only yesterday or day before yesterday. And there is this on that job, right? A couple of people who are trying to bridge that gap, right? So, basically something like how you have SaaS Boomi for founders, something, a community or, basically a place where all the freshers can, get the hang of how things work in SaaS before even, getting a job in SaaS.
Right. And the question you're asking is whether the SaaS, whether we should have more of these?
As in, should we take that responsibility of making sure that we have enough for the people coming in to actually understand, right? So I think a big problem has been even being aware of the SaaS ecosystem, right? Even now, all the placement discussions for the most part revolve around the TCS and the CTS, right? So does the community, does the ecosystem itself, as in each one of us, do we have like that responsibility, or is there something that we can do to help the freshers get that understanding?
Right. I mean, it's a difficult question to answer. So here's the thing, Krishna. Like, nobody owes anybody anything, right? If people like Karthik, who's a good friend, as well as like I think on that job is being led by India. I think she's a product manager. I mean, all of these people are doing this because they want to give back and they are doing it, right? But I don't think it's a prerogative of the SaaS industry to go and help freshers. It's on people who want to build careers to help themselves, actually, right? When I was graduating, we had no resources, right? Now there's commendable that there are resources, right? But it's not on SaaS to go and build these things out on the SaaS community to go and build these things out for freshers. Freshers need to find it out. There's enough here, right? I don't think there is a lack or a dearth of information, and if people want to find out something, it's already there.
That's true.
Most of the time, right? So I don't think it's on us. I don't think it's on the SaaS community to do that. Like nobody, I'll go back to that. Nobody owes anybody anything, right? If you want something, you better get your ass off the floor and like sweat a little for it.
Right. I mean, that's amazing. I'm really glad that you didn't, go around mincing words or anything. That's probably the most helpful advice for people just starting out, right? Rather than just tell what they might have wanted to hear.
Oh, it's because there is. See, when we graduated, like when I graduated, right? I was scared. I was shit scared, right? Whether I could make it, the career. I had no idea what to do with my life. I had no skills, nothing whatsoever. But then, you found and I keep saying this. I say this in Tamil, but I'll translate. I say one good man gave me a job, right? And then it's not on him to go like building a career for me. I have to build it myself, right? I have to find my way after that, right? So now when it's difficult, I got a break, and I'm very, very thankful for it, right? But I got a break because Girish read what I wrote and said, hey, I want this person in my company. Have you written that for yourself yet? Because you want to give the Girishes of the world, the Parses of the world, the people who are building things, great things, and are looking for great people, for good people to come and help them build stuff. Are you giving them a glimpse of what you can do? Like, have you built that thing first? If you haven't built that and you're waiting for a role, I don't see how they will help you, or all of us who have like done the hard yards will help you.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. So that's 2 out of 3. Let's move to random deck, the final part of the podcast, where I just ask you, bunch of random questions. And probably the only difference is they are less open-ended than how I had in the rest of the show. But you please feel free to be as elaborate as you'd like, right?
Sure.
So first one, what is an absolute non-negotiable for you in life?
Oh, wow. That's a surprising question. Time.
Cool. I mean, I'd probably like, to elaborate on that. So only
basically,
questions are short.
So basically what I'm trying to, what I always try to optimize for is time, is that I work very hard. I have gotten into a position where I am good at what I do. And now I want to now I'm enjoying what I do. And therefore I work that time. But the point of that work is to go and enjoy the rest of my life as well. And so therefore I don't spend 12 hours a day working. Right? It's completely like off the wall for me. I will spend sometimes 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day. And even that is a lot for me, right? Because you're doing creative work, you can do about 3 hours, 4 hours of very, very, concentrated work in a day. It's about all we can do, right? The rest of it goes in meetings, in administrative stuff that we have to do and all of that, right? And that's the normal stuff. Sometimes that thing stretches to 8 to 9 hours, and that's the long day. And sometimes what happens is that the expectation shifts in terms of like certain projects and certain things, and you deliver those, right? That's fine, like working for delivery. But the point of all of this work is that you enjoy time with your family, and you're like, making a career out of something that you love. And I completely, switch off on weekends. Like, it's very difficult for anybody to get hold of me. It's very difficult like when I have a holiday proper. Like, I won't talk, right? I won't like get into work. I won't open my laptop. And that's a very, very clear non-negotiable for me.
I mean, that's amazing, man. There is I think at least from the work from home started, one complaint in general has been this whole glorifying of working long hours, right? Putting in like unreasonable 12-13 hour shifts because you don't know, there is no clear boundary on when your day begins and ends, right? So I think it's nice that you have come out and said this, right? So a lot of people don't do that. The truth is, if beyond, especially like you said, some for creative work, uh, you probably max out at 5 or 6 hours, right?
It's very difficult. 5 or 6 hours itself is very difficult.
Right. So you'd probably want to take one more day and do the work uh, of the highest quality rather than just try to cram up a 10-hour shift or something and put out an half-assed work out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so next one, who are the marketeers that you look up to?
Girish himself.
Hmm.
Arvind Parthiban, CEO of Super Ops. There are a bunch of them, but the ones that I read, Camille Ricketts is somebody who I follow constantly. She's the head of marketing at Notion now. Seth Godin. I am a huge Seth Godin buff. Though that's like in our industry, I actually look up to Almitra Karnik. She was the former VP of marketing at CleverTap. She's pretty cool. She's done a lot of good stuff. There's like bunch of more people, but yeah, I don't want to name them all.
Cool. Next one, what is your favorite word in English?
Okay. I don't know. Yeah, actually. Muse is a good word.
Muse.
Yeah, MUSE.
That's you don't hear Muse a lot. But
I don't. Yeah, it's a word that has different meanings, and that's the point.
The next one. So, what is the kick-ass crisis management situation that you can recall from your time at Freshworks, Wingify, or iMocha? Someone who really handled a conflict well. Wow, that's something that I have to just keep in mind in case.
Okay. I don't have a particular incident in mind, but in the early days of Freshworks, there was a lot of stuff. Like we were a really high intensity, really, really like smart people working close together at something that that was growing, that was doing really well. So there was a lot of times when we would not all agree on something or the other. Like I was junior, like there was nothing for me to agree on, right? But I have seen Girish sort of very, very seamlessly uh, move the company from A to B, and all of the stuff that went on inside was never like nobody would ever know. We didn't have many like uh, issues as such, but when you have actually none of them as such, but when you have like a large number of like really smart people, you're going to have a certain amount of sort of conflict addressing to do, right? I don't like this button, I don't like this color, and this of that, and all of that. The way that you handle it is that none of it becomes big enough, and these things don't add up. And I think that's what as a manager, Girish is peerless.
Wow, it's nice. The next one, what is an advice you would give someone who is a couple of years into marketing, or you could just take SaaS as such?
I would suggest to them to write monthly reports to their boss. That's all. That will solve every problem almost. That will tell them what they are doing, what they are not doing. It will tell their boss what they are doing, not doing. At the end of the year, they'll be able to like take all of them and see if they have done a good job or not. At the end of the year, they can show to their manager if they've done a good job or not. At the end of like 2 to 3 years, they can figure out if they're growing or not. And so all of that will move that into action. It is the data part of their own career.
Oh, nice. It's interesting. What is a good habit that you are trying to work into your life and a bad habit you are trying to get rid of?
I mean, during the pandemic, I've started like walking more than 5-6 kilometers a day. But in the last month, because I've been traveling home for Diwali and back and all of that, it is not, I've not been able to do that. I'm just trying to keep that going. Um, that is one good habit I'm trying to keep going. What's a bad habit I'm trying to stop? Um, this is one thing that I'm actively trying to like stop doing, which is moving between tasks, right? There are 2-3 things open on your plate on your calendar, and you try to do all of them at once. So one of the things I'm trying to do is like work on this, finish this, even if it takes 2 days, then move on to the other one. And that's something I'm still struggling with.
Who are some of your friends or colleagues that you want to give a shout out to for the work
Oh,
that
okay.
they are doing, or just the person they are?
Oh, I have a bunch of folks. I think my for me, like Interview Mocha is doing a great job. I mean, it's a company you guys should look up. We just rebranded to iMocha. Like that's a company you should look up. That's a shout out to my, my bosses there, Amit Mishra and Sujit Karpe. I mean, SaaS usually comes out of the SaaS capitals, right? We have Chennai, we have Bangalore, we have a little bit in Delhi, but it's mostly like the south and west. And this is coming out of Pune, so that's something you could probably have a look at. Uh, Karthik Pasupati, whom we just spoke about, he writes a couple of newsletters which are really interesting and really good. One of them is, I think, the Weekend Product Manager, which is pretty amazing for the product, for the product managers to product management stuff that he writes about. And who else? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is being put out these days, right? Uh, my junior and my friend Sadhana, she writes the MRR newsletter for SaaSBoomi, right? And I mean, I'm also a SaaSBoomi volunteer, so a shout out to SaaSBoomi itself first. And Sadhana writes this great newsletter, and you guys should sign up for that. And yeah, I think that should be it. I mean, there are a bunch of other stuff, but I don't want to like go deep into that.
Cool. Okay, this might be a tough one for you. What is the book that you have gifted the most, or would like to gift the most? Something.
This is marketing. Seth Godin.
That was actually easy. I mean, knowing your history with books, I thought you would have a hard time coming up with that one good title.
No. Like for anybody, for the context of this conversation and like the people that might listen to this, This Is Marketing is probably the marketing bible of this decade, easily.
If I can, just push you a bit and ask for few other books that have had a really profound impact. I know you have mentioned quite a few in your newsletters as well, but just for folks listening here, what else would they
right? There's a book by Cal Newport called "So Good They Can't Ignore You." It's very, very important. Like it's probably the best book on my career I've read. Then about work, that's the Positioning book by April Dunford. I mean, that's a pretty good book, and people need to read that. There's Rory Sutherland's Alchemy, which is probably the it's the answer to the idea that you can measure everything in marketing and business. Alchemy by Rory Sutherland and Peter Thiel, 0 to 1. Yeah, I think that should be it.
Who is someone in your network, and you have had the fortune of working with a lot of smart people, who do you nominate to have on the Takeaway Club podcast?
I mean, there's a bunch of people, but I'll tell you whom, so the audience is mostly SaaS, mostly like marketing and people who are in and around this space. So I would love maybe, Karthik himself, he's a good one, right? But one of the things is that people don't really understand PR, and how to do it in India, right? And I can nominate one of my proteges, like Kingston David from Freshworks. He's the head of India PR at Freshworks, and you can have a look.
Nice.
I mean, he's probably one of the smartest marketing professionals in India. No one knows about. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing with PR, right? If they really do their job well, you don't get to hear much.
Exactly. Yeah, you should talk. That's a person you should talk to.
Awesome. I'll probably reach out to him real soon. So just a couple of ones before we go off the air. If you were Krishna, what is something that you would have asked Sairam that I have missed out on?
Sorry, I didn't get the question at all.
I'm sorry. Let me probably try to rephrase that. If you were me, what is something that you would have liked to ask you, which I haven't asked on the podcast?
I mean, nothing really, actually, Krishna. Because see, the thing is, right? People's version of you is different for almost everybody, right? You look at me a certain way, and I look at myself a certain way. Somebody else looks at you and me a certain way, right? So this podcast is sort of your idea of like who this person is. So I wouldn't add anything. I mean, you've asked what you wanted to ask, and that's good.
Awesome. So that wraps up our conversation, and thank you, Sairam. This has been an absolute delight. This is something that I wanted to have for quite a while, and I'm very glad we did this. There was a lot of learnings for me around, management, marketing, storytelling, things that I'm really passionate about, etc. So anything else you want to add to close off?
No, nothing at all. I thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. It's just that I would love for more of our SaaS people to actually get on such conversations, have a lot more to talk about. I think it gives if not for just us and for the ecosystem, I think it just gives younger folks a lot of knowledge that they'll probably not get anywhere else.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you like the conversation, please share it with your network or good friends who would enjoy this. And consider subscribing to the Takeaway Club podcast on your music streaming platforms or YouTube so you don't miss out on new episodes. And if you're listening to this conversation on Apple Podcast, it would be amazing if you can rate the podcast or leave a review, which goes a long way in helping other podcast listeners find the show. I'll see you soon with a brand new episode. Until then, stay safe and take care.